Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you in association with Penguin India. Today's episode is a very special one as I think it's very important for all of us to delve into India's freedom struggle and understand the very nuanced movement that took place in the preceding years. And today's episode actually deals with a very interesting topic because in today's episode, we have Dr. Usha Thakkar who will be talking about her book, The Congress Radio, which documents the exploits of the Congress radio that ran during the Quit India movement of 1942. Dr. Thakkar benefits from the advantage of having access to Usha Mehta herself in her younger years, and she delves into this with the pace of a thriller but with the details of an academic piece of work. Without giving anything away, let's delve right into it. Hello, Usha ji. Welcome to the Kitabi Karwan podcast. We're so glad to have you on our podcast. And let me just speak for someone who's gotten out of university for a few years ago. It feels great to be interviewing a former professor. For once, I'll be asking the questions. So it'll be a different and unique experience altogether. Uh, and for our listeners who are just watching this video for the first time, we have Usha Thakkar ji with us, who has written Congress Radio, which supremely interesting book for that matter, about a very unique phase of our freedom struggle, documenting the lives of primarily Usha Mehta and others who ran the Congress Radio initially for a period of 3 to 4 months in 1942, right after the Quit India movement began. Uh, Usha ji, welcome. And the first question which I have for you is something that I ask all my guests on the podcast. So, very in a great way that I think in today's world, authors get a lot more recognition than they did earlier. They have a social media following, people know about them, they're publicly available profiles. But still, I believe there are, fun little parts or sides of authors which are generally hidden away from their readers. So, ma'am, would you be able to share one side or one facet of your life with us, which probably we can't find out from the blurb of your book or a quick internet search?
Thank you, Siddharthi, first of all, for inviting me here and for giving me this opportunity to talk to your listeners. Thank you. And Kitabi Karwa. You see, now I do not know what is not known about me. And I think everybody knows that I've been a professor, an academic, and I love reading. And yes, I think many may not know that I like to read fiction also. But there are phases of reading fictions. And there are times when one likes to laze around, do nothing, let the mind wander. I like to do that also, to share a secret. I think all of us like, but yes, I do like
that. That's refreshing to hear from a professor that sometimes for that it is very important to have this kind of phase in your life also, like when you need to let your mind wander and let the creative juices flow, so as to say. But Usha ji, I'll like just jump right towards your book. And the first thing that that grabbed my attention was so the fact that whenever you try and read about the freedom struggle, the topics are generally a lot more wider, right? Like you would have your books, which are your broad-based books, which cover the entire freedom struggle, or you would have books which focus on people, like individual freedom fighters, rather than or like an event. But I was very curious when I got to know about your book because it focused on a very, very narrow event. As important as it is, it was a very niche topic. So, what was it about the Congress radio that drew you towards writing, a piece of academic literature on it?
Again, Siddharji, I'm very happy that you could read my book because I'm very happy that it is reaching where it should be reaching to the young people of today. So thank you for reading. And yes, why was I drawn to this particular subject? Let me tell you a little story, which is my own experience. I'm taking you to 1960s, the mid 60s, 1964, 65, to be precise. So I was new to Bombay, now Mumbai, and I just completed my MA, Masters in Political Science. I thought I was a good student and I always wanted to do my PhD. So for pursuing my PhD, I was in search of a good professor. And people suggested Dr. Usha Mehta. And well, I just went to her and she was very kind, very considerate. We started talking. We immediately talked about politics, political theory, Plato, Gandhi, Kautilya. I mean, and then slowly we started developing the rapport. And I started my PhD. And I was very happy that, okay, now I've got some anchor in my life. I'm starting PhD. And, it's a great feeling at 26 years of age when you are doing your PhD and you can tell people, oh, I'm registered for PhD. And then people would ask, who was your guide? And then, I would say Usha Ben. And the moment I'll say Usha Ben, many would react, oh, Radio Ben. So I said, why Radio Ben? And then, of course, by that time I was hearing the stories. It was more like a little folklore that, how Usha Ben and her colleagues had operated the Congress radio of 1942. And then once I asked, I said, okay, so did you ever run the Congress radio? Were you a freedom fighter? Siddharthi, you can understand at young age, you can ask such questions. and, and she was very nice, very kind. And she said, yeah, I've done something. And then I said, Ushaben, you must talk about it. And no, she said, sometime. Then, of course, I would meet her, we talk a little, and then I started teaching. I completed my PhD. Then I was teaching in SNDT, Women's University. And of course, we would keep on meeting. And over the years, our personal bonding became very strong. And so I said, before 20 years or so, I said, Usha Ben, you must tell me the Congress radio story. Because, or I said, you must write it. She said, no, why would I write? Maybe someday you can write. And I said, oh. So I would always start questions. I would say, like an academic. Who, when, how, who started the radio? When did it start? Or maybe like a good journalist also, I don't know. So I said, no, but what did you broadcast? And how did you get the news? And how were you caught? How were you arrested? What was the judgment? She said, slowly. So she started telling. And I would just pick up, I had my notebook and pen with me, ready. So whenever she would say anything, I would note down. Now, you see, we were not in the age of this hi-fi technology and all that. So I thought writing is better. And then slowly the story unfolded, which was really very exciting. And one day she also gave me her bundle of papers. She said, Usha, if you're really interested. I said, I am very much. I said, I want you to write. She said, no, now someday you will have to write. So now these were her precious case papers. Siddharthi, they were the accounts of the witnesses and all that, the judgment and all that, whatever she had. Now, by that time, I was also developing some insight into the subject. And before some years, I also did a book with a friend, Gandhi in Bombay, towards Swaraj. So I was quite used to going to our Maharashtra state archives. And I tell you, there is so much of treasure of information. Because as I would talk to Usha, when I realized that 1942 was the most exciting time for freedom struggle. And slowly the Usha Ben passed away in 2000. So I was left with precious memories and more precious my and her desire that, we should write it. I should write it. So I started writing. But again, you know how it is. Idea of writing is one thing. And when you start having your pen and paper or working on your computer, it's very difficult. Now, by that time, I had learned to, to operate on my computer, my desktop. So I would write on that. And I realized that still there are many gaps because when Usha Ben talks about 1942, she is talking about exactly what happened and what was in her bulletins. But I said I needed to know what was happening in the city. And that took me a little back. Say, 1942, we are talking about August. I said, let me go back. And then I started going backwards and I realized that the students of the city were so much engaged in the freedom struggle. And you get such impressive hoardings, you can say not signboards, but pamphlets, and where they will say education can wait, not freedom. Every student behind every students union, and every students union behind the demand for freedom. Freedom has to be complete. So slowly I realized that this is so important for me to get into that ethos of the city. And then that also took me to some of the books and some of what our British officers were writing to their superiors. Like there's a very telling observation in a letter. At that time, the Viceroy Lord Linlithgow, he wrote to the British Prime Minister Churchill that I am engaged in meeting by far the most serious rebellion since that of 1857. So, I mean, what was the gravity of the rebellion under quote? And at that time, again going back to Usha Ben's story, Usha Ben was present on AICC session at Gwalior Tank Maidan, then now August Kranti Maidan, you are familiar with. When Gandhi gave the mantra, do or die. And Usha Ben says that, we were electrified. She had gone with her colleagues and immediately they started thinking, now what can be done? Now, Usha Ben was a very bright student and she thought that this is the time when the press is gagged, newspapers are suppressed, all the news cannot reach the people. This is the time to make the people aware of what is happening in the country. And she thought of this idea that, come on, we have to start radio. Her colleagues immediately picked it up. And see, now this is the story. As you know, the AICC session is on 7th and 8th of August. Now, they started mobilizing their resources, whatever they were at that time. And as she herself said, that we are all depended on our parents for our pocket money. I mean, barring somebody doing tuition here, there, but not enough. They decided that they had to do something. And this is what Siddharthi, again, deviating a little, but I think this is what the youth is capable of, dreaming the impossible or seemingly impossible. So that is what they did. And then Babu Bhai Thakkar, or his name was Vittal Das Thakkar, he was the person who said, okay, let us try to mobilize the resources, not only financial, but also technical. So they found this printer who was a technician, and he said he could help with the building of wireless, of course, illegal. And they started. And now just I'll finish my story in 2-3 minutes. And they started building the radio station. And it's very interesting. If you see the dateline, 7th, 8th August, they listen to Gandhi. Then they decide to start their radio. On 14th of August or so, they start buying the microphone and amplifier and all that. And on 27th, they start broadcasting. So the whole story of the Congress radio is from 27 August to 12th of November. So I thought it is such an exciting story. I mean, there is mystery, there is thrill, there is drama, and all pervading spirit of patriotism, the love for nation, love for freedom. So all these things drove me to write this. And I'm glad I could write it because all the time I was apprehensive. I said, I don't know uh, how I'm going to do. Because as we talk a little later, there are plots and subplots and all that. But anyway, I thought at least I could complete my book. Thank you.
No, Usha, thank you so much for that detailed answer, because I think you exactly describe what I felt, at least while reading the book. Uh, Particularly about, when you speak about how the 1942 movement was so different than, say, the previous ones, if you were looking back at, say, the non-cooperation or the civil disobedience movement. And I think a lot of it just came from the very fact that the major leaders were arrested the moment the movement was announced. So a lot of the uh, activities that were happening were, as you rightly pointed out, by students or by women and by people who are not directly involved with political organizing at a highest level, but are very spontaneous and very energetic in terms of what and dreaming the impossible. Right? Like education can wait, freedom cannot is something that was a very electrifying line to read when I read it in the book. But
Thank you.
I would actually like to point out a couple of things that you mentioned and draw you into that question. You the way you were describing it, it also seemed how you describe a fictitious piece, right? I mean, it's thrilling to read, and there's mystery, and obviously there was betrayal, and there was intrigue, and there was rebellion, and there were plots and subplots. And I think that is one of the hallmarks of a very good non-fiction author, about being able to present history as a piece of fiction, right? Which keeps a reader engaged with the kind of text that they're reading. So how did you go about doing this, given that you have such a major academic background? I mean, I absolutely enjoyed reading the book, and it was one of those rare academic books that I read which didn't feel like one as much. It read like fiction, and by that I mean that as a compliment, to the extent that it flew really well. So was there any like special measures that you adapted while kind of writing this particular piece down, or the way you framed sentences? Was it something that you consciously decided to frame certain phrases or paragraphs in a particular way to kind of engross the reader, or was it just something that just flew out of your hand in that sense?
Thank you, Siddharthji. Uh, I think paragraphs just flew. And, it seemed that there was a flow. I mean, there was a stream, and I was
Yeah.
flowing because all what I had was the hard data and real hard data. And as you know, sometimes truth is stranger than the fiction. Now, when Gandhi had said that the bonds of a slave are snapped the moment he considers himself to be free. So Usha and her colleagues, they said we consider ourselves to be free. Now, not only them, but I think the whole people of India, the youth of India. So they decided to take the movement in their hands. So, uprooting the trees, cutting down telephone wires, telegraph wires, destruction, and the destroying of municipal property just was accepted. I mean, they never thought that these are the cases of violence because they thought their only aim is to disrupt the British administration and that they managed to do it well. Now, because the news were suppressed, the people would not know. Like people in Mumbai would not know at that time what was happening in Odisha or what
Right.
was happening even in Delhi.
Right.
So these people thought that their aim was twofold. One is, of course, to spread the message of freedom. So
Right.
I always feel, and I used to tell Ushaben, I said it is like, your voice must be like a fresh breeze
Right.
flowing the message of freedom. Because, I remember her energetic voice when she would say, This is Congress radio on 42.34 meters from speaking from somewhere in India, because they did not want to divulge where they were speaking. And they also made it very clear that this radio is not for entertainment, not even for propaganda, but for giving certain directives to the people in their struggle for freedom and
Right.
to give correct news. I love this phrase, it comes again and again. And it is her words, these are the words that are quoted in the bulletins of the Congress radio. And I think, again, I was very fortunate that I got the original bulletins, the broadcasts. And some of them are written by Usha Bem, because we know the writing. And one
Right.
of them I put even in my book. So, as you said, that is so much of energy around you. When
Right.
here is what Usha Ben said, her interviews here, the material I had collected from the archives, and here, these are the bulletins, these are the case struggle. So my job was to put this jigsaw puzzle together,
Right.
because there are plots like in this from 27 August to 12th of November, they change at least 5 places.
Right.
And since our city, it is all in this area, from
Right.
Sipitang to Girgam to Chopati.
Right.
And
Right.
how this young team must have done, and so how they find each house, and how
Right.
again they book it under fictitious name. Sometimes
Right.
it is Keshavlal, Chaganlal, sometimes it is Thakur, sometimes it is Pandya. So that
Right.
is one part. The second part of it, that the bulletins must be flowing regularly, because this
Right.
young team is engaged in giving news every day, sometimes
Right.
even twice in the morning and evening. But by that time, uh, Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia had come to know about their work, and he had sent them a word, and then they met. So Dr. Lohia said, we are taking away full responsibility of financial and other matters. So you please continue with your work.
Continue with.
And that was a very fortunate happening. That's what
Right.
Usha Ben said. And then they had Dr. Lohia and person like Sucheta Kriplani. Now you see, again going back to 1942 days, it's an exciting time because it's also the war time. Then our resistance to the British administration. And people just want to do something. So they said radio news is the best thing to do. And Dr. Lohia and Sucheta Kriplan, see, these are all underground, at that time underground. So they
Right.
were not caught. And Bombay was the center for underground activities, not only of radio, but for other things also. And we do not know much about this. But all these people, they had the network. So their network was throughout the country. So they would collect the news from all over the country. And I
Right.
found it so fascinating that there is no paid stuff.
Right.
There is no email. There are
Right.
not even so many phone calls, because all the time they were worried that British
Right.
police will catch them. And
Right.
they managed to volunteer the selfless work of the Indian citizens. And every day they would get some masala. And Ushavan said sometimes they would be in a format, and sometimes we would have to write hurriedly.
Hmm.
So if you see each bulletin, it's like a complete piece in itself.
Right.
If they're saying the news of railway tracks being removed, here are the news from Bengal, next paragraph from Bihar, next paragraph from somewhere else. So like that,
Right.
it continues.
Right.
So yes, that is why, coming back to your question, I thought that I just had to put them together. I had to
Right.
make a plan in my mind or on my computer that how
Right.
I'm going to make my chapters and subchapters. And then
Right.
it just flowed.
Right.
Yes.
And with the passion that you're speaking about this, I have actually no qualms believing you when you say that the words just flew, because and it actually seems like it. You can see that you were very interested in what was happening, and that actually comes across to the reader as well, and that makes them read the book more. But something that's very, very, very interesting for me is that you have a very daunting list of references. I mean, you're very meticulous, and that's obviously comes from your career as an academic. That each and every, practically everything that you've stated in the book is very well packed with research. And you've mentioned how you were lucky enough to have access to Usha Ben's personal letters and collection of papers from that time, and the Maharashtra State Archive. But were there any other resources that you uh, tended to try and gain access to, and how difficult was this process? Uh, I can imagine it not being a very simple, straightforward process. Obviously, like unraveling, and particularly, and it also fascinated me because it was a legal case as well, and as I'm a lawyer by training, so
Oh, wow.
in fact, yeah, so I read the judgment and the cases, and it's very intricate when you have to read arguments and how they're being deciphered. So, what was your process in that sense? How did you go about uh, this process? And the second part of the same question is that once you were done with this process, how did you end up simplifying it for the layman, right? I mean, what was your writing process for that particular segment?
Uh, I would say I was right. I was simply simplifying for myself. I said I
Right,
should know what I'm writing. So
right,
I did not want to write any jargons, or
right,
because I said the case is simple and direct, like
right,
Gandhi's life, or like Ushaben's life, or like Ushaben's work, and
right,
work of so many freedom fighters. So I said the
right,
story has to be told directly. So that
right,
was my object. And secondly, as you said, yes, references, I know there are too many. But
right,
then maybe that is the weakness or strength of being an academic, that when you say something or you write something, there must be some proof that it is
right,
not fiction. What I'm writing is truth.
right,
And yeah, it was not easy, but I think it's also the training of being an academic, that you
right,
are in that groove. And after so
right,
many decades, I thought I was quite okay. But you are right. There were Usha Ben's interviews, then
mhm,
Usha Ben's papers, then my material collected from the archives. But then there are so many books which I thought I must refer. Like, there are books of 1940s, 42, India Unreconciled. Books like that I
right.
found right in Manipal Library.
Oh wow.
Yes, yes. And so that was so good for me.
Right,
And not that I could include everything, but then I think the whole idea was to give a feel to the
right,
reader that look, this is available. This is what
right,
it was. And in
right,
1942, it was not a quiet time. And in fact, the Britishers themselves, they're quite hustled. And they thought maybe this is the time to move. And Gandhi had said that this is my last struggle. And
right,
Congress radio would announce that this is our last struggle and win we must. And
right,
you read those bulletins, I mean, they are written with so much of passion and so much of
right,
idealism that I think even when you say that I think that is reflecting on me, because I can visualize Usha Ben and her colleagues and running around and doing all the things. And I must tell you something in lighter vein, that
right,
the day Usha Ben and Chandrakant Pai were arrested while
right,
operating that particular radio station, they had been to Babu Bhai's office in
right,
the first half part of the day, as you read. And when they saw the police coming and Babu Bhai will be arrested very soon, then they asked, Usha Ben asked rather, very nicely, that what should I tell doctor about the mother's health? Doctor means Dr. Loya, mother means transmitter. And then Babu Bhai replied very nicely that tell the doctor to take his decision, because I can't come. He can continue the same prescription or change the prescription. So that was the message. And then Usha Ben goes, meets Dr. Loya, and then they decide that no, we would continue this. So now coming back to first half of your question. So, I had to put this all together,
Right.
like where exactly Usha Ben said and how it flows with the story. Because I did not want, at least to the best of my ability, to create any obstacles in the story, that it should flow.
Right.
But at the same time, I didn't wanted to make it too, too cumbersome on the reader.
Right.
So references are at the back. And coming to your question about legal thing, okay, not easy, as a lawyer. Uh, Fortunately, at the whole of the judgment, and then Usha Ben had talked about how they were arrested and how the charges were framed and all that. And being a lawyer, you would know better. I can't remember the exact sections, but Indian Penal Code and Telegraph Act and Defense of India rules, and they were charged. These five people. Bhai Thakkar, then Vittalbhai Jhaveri, then Ushaben Mehta, Chandrakant Bhai Jhaveri, and Nanak Bhai, and this from Mutwane. So now the charges are framed. And then I asked Ushaben, I said, don't you think that you were wrongly accused, or you were wrongly arrested, or you were wrongly punished? I mean, what's your take on that? She said in a very stoic manner, no, government was doing what it should be doing. The judge was doing his duty, and we were doing what we thought we should be doing. So, what was for us an act of patriotism was not the same for them. For them, it was violation of the rules and the laws.
Right.
So then I started understanding her, and she says, no, the judge was also good and he gave patient hearing to all. But again, I found it very impressive that when Usha Ben was asked, then do you have to say anything for the evidence adduced against you? She said nothing. So the judge asked, do you want to say anything in your defense? Nothing. So Usha Ben said, we knew what we were going to get.
Good.
And even then, they had the whole, between five of them, they're very good lawyers, and like MC Satalwad and our came Munshi. And
Mm.
this is again, Usha Ben would make it so light. Just think, Usha, when we were in the court listening to their arguments, we enjoyed. What did you enjoy? Just think, no, they were saying that what we are heroes, and what the government is doing is just oppression of the people's desire to be free. So these are also the two perspectives. And now I tried to get more particulars about the case, but because it was a special court constituted under ordinance in 1942, I
Right.
could not get more records. I was fortunate that I had depositions of all the witnesses, so that
Right.
helped me. Unfortunately, even the judgment, as you must have read, is pretty long and very
Yes.
exhaustive, covers many aspects. So, well,
Right.
I, being a non-lawyer, tried to do whatever I could.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. So, Usha ji, now I would to take the conversation to slightly lighter things. And
Mhm.
so, something that you pointed out right at the beginning of our conversation is that you love to read fiction as well, right? Once in a while. And so, firstly, could you tell us what's the role of fiction books in the life of an academic, or for that matter, someone who writes nonfiction, right? You've written a lot of nonfiction. You've been a professor for a major chunk of your life, and you uh, have obviously engaged with the academic world for a very major part of your life. But what role do you think fiction has played in your life, or do you think, or you'd want to tell any academic who's listening to this podcast about, uh, if at all, you think what fiction they should be engaging with?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that it enables us to understand different ways of looking at life.
Mhm.
Because the fiction is different, every author is different, his or her characters are bound to be different. So I think it gives a different insight into the lives of the people around. And sometimes we find strange things, like I don't remember the exact author, but it was it that one, there is only one incident and different characters view it differently.
Right.
Now, it's very human.
Right.
So this is one aspect. And secondly, I also feel that sometimes the fiction writer can give you the words which otherwise you can't find. Because sometimes I feel something very strongly about it.
Right.
Certain thing, say like deprivation or women's pitiable condition, or
Right.
I may write in a very academic manner,
Right.
but the fiction writer would portray it so differently, so
Right.
vividly, so deeply that it will make a mark on the reader's mind and heart both. And I also feel that reading fiction gives freshness to the mind. It brings some fresh breeze
Right.
from the ideas otherwise you would not imagine.
Right.
So that way it is important. And what else? What else? I think it also it's like a magic wand. So you are here, but you are reading something about Bengal or say Maitreyi Devi. You go to that world, that time frame.
Right.
So I think this is the magic of reading fiction.
Right.
And of
Right.
course, sorry, the fiction writer has to be very capable.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Usha ji, that's a very refreshing thing that you've spoken about, because I think, like, I mean, that's something that stood out in your writing for me, right? And that's, I
Thank
think,
you.
what a lot of people, and I think that's something that I struggled with a bit in law school, where we used to have this discussion amongst ourselves, where we would discuss about how academic texts could actually have far more reaching impact and go beyond the circle that they read in, right? I mean, there is a ring fencing of academia that eventually ends up happening because of the for a variety of reasons, and one of us which we believed at that point in time was also that how the text is presented or how the information is presented. And I think these points that you spoke about, how fiction influences an academic, becomes very important, because at the end of it, that the what an academic comes up with, right, if whether it's a fresh idea or whether it's just delving into what's already happened, I think that information, obviously has to be read by people, your peers, but then when it has to reach the masses, right, and that's something that we saw in Usha Ben's work, the Congress Radio's work as well. It is taking information that is critical and transmitting it to the masses, which is what brings about the actual change or whatever that you're wishing to pursue, rather than leaving it there. So I think, in your words, have actually a major impact for what academic writers should be thinking about at this
Thank
point of time. Uh,
thank you.
right. But Usha ji, I would like to just wrap up this interview, and I have one couple of questions actually before we end this. The so I mean, you've read all your life, so I wouldn't want to demean your reading life by saying that could you please name your favorite books, because I don't think anyone ever can have just one small set of favorite books. Every book has their own impact. But I would like you to at least point out a few books or a couple of books which impacted your way of thinking, or you as a person, that it had a very revolutionary impact in terms of how you perceive the world around you, or it became a founding text for your on which you based a lot of your life principles.
Okay. I think not an easy question again,
I'm sorry.
Siddharth. But yes, I mean, you are very right. Because we read books. At that time, they are important. Then again, they don't fade away, but they go in background. Then you read different books. And then again, that phase continues. But if I have to just pick up one or two books, I would pick up two. One is Gandhi's autobiography, his experiments with truth.
Right.
I read it long back, and then every 3 years, 4 years, there is some occasion to read, and I said, "Oh, I didn't get that in my earlier reading." Just to give you an example, uh, we all know that Gandhi suffered racial discrimination in South Africa, and he was thrown on that station of Peter Maritzburg when he sat in that cold for the whole night. Now, I find it very interesting that what did he think at that particular time when he was thrown out? And then he says, I was wondering, should I be fighting for my rights? Or should I just go away? Or should I finish my work and go away? But no, then he decided that he must fight for his rights because he said that what I've felt or what I've experienced is just the um, expression of the disease. The disease is actually racial discrimination.
Right.
So I said, wow, that's so important.
Right.
And I feel that such moments come in everybody's life.
Correct.
Sometimes we do not pause. We do not wonder why is it like that. But I think here, such books can show you the way very gently,
Right.
not preaching, but they ask us to take our own decisions. So, like that, yes, Gandhi autobiography, and I even like the name Experiments with Truth.
Right.
It doesn't even say they are successful, they are not successful, they are
Right.
experiments. So each one has to experiment.
Right.
And the second book, which has made impact on my mind and which has stayed with me, is, do not get surprised, but Kautilya's Arthashastra.
Okay.
Yeah, because interestingly, see, I had studied Sanskrit also for my bachelor's.
Right.
And when I started going to the university and discussing my topic with Usha Ben,
Mhm.
we were of course wondering what to do. My first choice, one of my choices was, of course, I could do a comparative study of Gandhi and Marx. And secondly, I am interested in ancient Indian political thought.
Right.
And so was Usha Ben.
Right.
And I said, oh, Kautilya's Arthashastra. She said, Usha, that's great. Do a diplomacy in Kautilya's Arthashastra.
Right.
And again, that was in 70
Right.
or late 60s. And I started reading Kautilya. First, I read Shama Shastri's translation. Then I said, let me try to read Sanskrit. Surprisingly, I could manage that. And as you said, that, and then we used to have very stimulating discussions, Sushaben and I, and sometimes other colleagues. But Siddharth ji, Kautilya also comes back again and again
Right.
in different ways, because when you see the politics today, or when you try to analyze the political situation in any country, or even interstate relations, and then I said, no, Kautilya did think of a theory in international relations. Now, this also, at least earlier when I was a student, now things have changed. When I was a student, we were told that no, there is no international theory
Right.
in ancient India. All ancient Indians knew was about religion, about texts, about rituals, politics, just forget it. And whether it was Mahabharata or Kautilya's Arthashastra, they were not given the due importance.
Right.
But, and the Western scholars like Keith, we said that if Kautilya's Arthashastra is what the Indians have to show against Plato's Republic and Aristotle's politics, I mean, then it's nothing. But
Right.
well, now things have changed, because I think we need to reread, reassess such texts and try to contemporize it, because they have the transtemporal value.
Right.
And of course, otherwise, I read many things.
Well, those are two really interesting books, Usha ji, and I think they genuinely stand out again in terms of books that have impacted people. And I think that will just give the listeners of this podcast some more insight, and I hope that maybe someone, or maybe I end up picking up one of the two. I've read Gandhiji's autobiography in parts, like in extracts of it, but never the whole thing. But now I think it's one of those things that I should get about to
Oh,
doing.
that's nice.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Ushaji, for joining us today. This was a lovely conversation, and I hope your book reaches more readers and people, particularly people my age or younger to me, because I think reading about these exploits and the courage with which these activities were carried out is something that I think every Indian citizen, or in fact any youth, young citizen across the world, should read about and understand the dynamics with which how such functions go about. Thank you for writing such a beautiful book, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Siddharthi, for inviting, and thank you for reading my book. I'm so happy, and I wish you all the best in all your such activities. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode. If you like this episode, remember to share and subscribe across podcasting platforms and on YouTube. We are also on Instagram, where we put up some really interesting bookish content and have live conversations with different bibliophiles, authors, translators, etc. You'd love it. Check us out at the rate Kitabi Karwan. Thank you so much.